So we're joined today with Gene Baur, is the co-founder of the Farm Sanctuary, which is an organization been around since 1986. Gene, thanks for joining us here.
Thanks, it's good to be here.
I'm just wondering maybe if you could start off with a little bit of your personal history. I mean, what kind of things happened in your life that sort of got you interested in this issue and that actually triggered your desire to form this organization?
Well, I grew up in Hollywood, California, and like most people, I grew up without thinking very much about my food choices and about the consequences of our agricultural system. But I always wanted to do something to make a difference and to contribute positively to the world. I didn't want to just get a job and make money and be a cog in a wheel, that I was concerned about the direction it was going. So I got involved with human rights organizations, environmental organizations, and animal rights organizations. And as time went, I saw that industrialized animal farming was impacting pretty much everybody on the planet. It was threatening the well-being of citizens and our Earth, and it was something I felt really needed to be addressed. So in 1986, co-founded Farm Sanctuary.
And what kind of things does Farm Sanctuary work on?
Well, when we started in 1986, there was very little known among citizens and mainstream about what was happening to animals on farms. So we started by visiting places, videotaping conditions, documenting the reality behind the production of meat, milk, and eggs. And in some cases, we would literally find living animals in trash cans or living animals on piles of dead animals. So we took them home, took care of them, and pretty soon it was clear we needed more space. So we now operate 2 shelters, one in Watkins Glen, New York, one in Orland, California, where these animals are allowed to live out their lives. And we also have active visitor programs where people come and get a chance to meet these animals. We also have overnight cabins. People can stay overnight at the farm. We have visitor centers where people can come learn about where the animals came from and learn about the factory farming system. And they can also learn about what they can do to make a difference. Because so often the reality behind factory farming is brutal and it can be pretty depressing. So we want to provide alternatives that are hopeful and empowering. And one of the things we encourage people to do is to think about what they eat and to eat in a way that is mindful and consistent with their own values. And I'm a vegan, have been a vegan since 1985, and I think most people, when they look at these things with an open mind, would consider a vegan lifestyle as something that makes sense.
You mentioned, rescuing some of these animals to bring back to the farm sanctuary. Now, I think for a lot of people, they think of, animal rescue. They think of, cats and dogs, sort of primarily. I mean, that's sort of the kind of the popular sort of notion. How is it similar for you to do both, any farm animal or any animal for that matter? What's the similarities between that in terms of how people view the importance of providing, sanctuary for dogs and cats?
Well, in the United States, we keep cats and dogs as companion animals, so we see them as members of our family in many cases. But in the case of farm animals, they're just seen as pieces of meat from the day they're born until the day they're slaughtered. And that is something we're trying to confront and trying to challenge. And the fact is that cows and pigs and chickens and other animals that are typically seen as food, have feelings and suffer, and they have personalities, and they're not that different than cats and dogs. And the line that we put between, farm animals and companion animals in the U.S. is really quite arbitrary. And if you go to other countries, you'll see that, for example, in China, they eat cats and dogs regularly. In places like India, cows are not eaten. So these lines between what animals are edible and what animals are not is really quite arbitrary. And we want to draw attention to that and ask people to think with an open mind about how they view other animals. And I really do believe that the way we treat other animals speaks very much about who we are as a people. If we're kind, that says one thing, but if we're cruel, that says an entirely different thing. And unfortunately today, the way animals are treated on farms is disturbing, and we think it needs to be changed.
On your website, it says that the Farm Sanctuary works to end cruelty to farm animals and promotes compassionate living through rescue, education, and advocacy. I want to talk a little bit about the education part of it, because it seems that, one of the difficulties, I mean, I agree with you, I think when people hear this information, since it's not like readily available necessarily, that quite often it really provokes thought in people. But considering the level of marketing that goes on, particularly from the slaughterhouse meat industry, the food industry in general, You know, what do you tell people in terms of like how you can sort of combat that? You know, because it's not a matter of matching it because we don't have the kind of wealth that they do, but you know, how do we sort of try to counteract the influence that that has?
Unfortunately, animal agriculture has an awful lot of influence, and most people grow up eating animal products without really thinking about it. And you know, our goal is to make people think, and then to act in a way that makes sense and is in their own personal interest, and also aligns with their own values. Now, how do we do that? It is tough, as you say, because agribusiness has, you know, every year they spend millions and millions of dollars to get out their message. We can't compete with that, but what we can do is make the information available through literature, through our websites, and the internet is, I think, a very valuable tool for reaching people. Put pictures in front of people so they see what is actually happening, because most people don't think very much about how the animals are treated and don't really perhaps want to. And that's one of our biggest challenges, is to encourage people to recognize that they should be responsible for their actions. They should want to know what is happening and what they're contributing to. And I think most people, when they take responsibility for their actions, are going to want to do good. Most people don't like cruelty to animals. Most people don't like to eat in a way that makes them sick. Most people don't like to eat in a way that contributes to global warming. The meat industry is a greater contributor to global warming than the entire transportation industry, for example. So while these problems may seem so massive, and there are many huge problems in the world, and sometimes, unfortunately, people can feel disempowered and become apathetic and basically give up. But when it comes to what we eat, that is something each of us has an awful lot of control over. And each of us every day can make choices that are healthy, that are better for the environment, and better for animals. And so becoming a vegan is good for everybody. And that is something we encourage people to consider. And if you can't do it completely all in one day, you can try one day a week not eating animal products. And it's something that's very empowering, and it's something that I think most people would really enjoy if they tried it.
You raised the issue that you know, the meat industry contributes more to global warming than transportation does. I think, again, that's sort of common knowledge amongst people. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about in ways it does. I mean, specifically, like how does that contribute to, you know, creating greenhouse gases or carbon emissions or whatever. And then maybe follow up that with this idea that's the importance of talking about this issue, you know, beyond just how we see animals, that there's lots of ways that we can sort of approach the importance of thinking about food that connects it to other social justice issues.
Food is perhaps our most intimate relationship with the earth. What we eat is incorporated into our bodies. And if we eat bad, diseased meat, for example, it affects our bodies and it affects our minds. And these are products that are often produced in ways that are violent and bloody. And you know, so by buying these products, we're actually contributing to people having to work in a slaughterhouse, where their job for 8 hours a day is cutting the throats of animals. And you know, when you have animals commodified at these slaughterhouses, you also then tend to have people commodified, and this sort of commodification of sentient life, which is rife throughout the whole system. And that's really what we're combating, that sort of mentality. And the consequences, you know, as we mentioned, are our own health is affected, you know, physically as well as in other ways. The environment is affected. And when we talk about global warming and the massive impact that animal agriculture has on it, that involves, you know, growing lots and lots of crops in order to feed. If we were to eat plants directly, it'd be a lot more efficient than feeding plants to animals, who then, you know, waste something like 90% of that energy, and then killing the animals and eating the animals. That's very wasteful. And crops today are now being increasingly grown with chemical fertilizers, with massive machines that plow and harvest. Then they have to be transported, and then the same whole process occurs with animals, who are then being fed these animals and being managed, and the manure is now being spread and, you know, collected, and then the animals are transported and slaughtered, and then the animal products are refrigerated. So there's an awful lot of energy that goes into this whole system. And you know, there was also an article in the New York Times that ran earlier this year that talked about how it compared a vegetarian meal to a meat meal, and it showed that the meat meal required 16 times more fossil fuels than the vegetarian meal. So it's just a very wasteful system. It's an unnecessary system, and it's one that most people are unwittingly supporting by buying animal products.
Yeah, and I think that that's why the education key is so important. And then you do all kinds of advocacy. I mean, in addition to what you already mentioned about rescuing animals, what other kinds of ways do you do advocacy around this compassionate living?
Well, we encourage people, first of all, to be empowered and make sensible food choices, but we also work to try to change systemic problems. And we've weighed in on the Farm Bill, for example, which is discussed every 5 to 7 years in Washington, D.C. And unfortunately, this piece of legislation, while it was initially intended to provide support for farmers and provide healthy food for citizens, it's basically been hijacked, and now it provides support for industrialized animal farmers, and it promotes unhealthy food for citizens. So we are trying now to get some of the supports in the Farm Bill away from this industrialized animal farming model towards more local, plant-based agriculture. And we would love to see more community-supported agriculture programs, for example, farmers markets, community gardens. We think this is good for the planet. We think this is good for consumers. Nobody loses with that approach. And so we'd like to see more of that, and we've advocated for that in the Farm Bill. Got a long way to go, unfortunately, because agribusiness is very much entrenched. We also work on passing laws at the state level to end certain cruelties. Right now we're working on Proposition 2 in California, which is a citizens initiative that's going to be voted on this November, and it was put on the ballot because citizens across the state of California collected signatures, nearly 800,000 signatures, to put this on the ballot. And it seeks to ban the use of veal crates, which are 2-foot wide enclosures where veal calves are chained by the neck for their whole lives. It also seeks to ban gestation crates, 2-foot wide enclosures where breeding pigs live for months at a time, for years when it's all added up, and for egg-laying hens who live in these small battery cages. We're going to try to ban those with Proposition 2. So that's another type of advocacy effort we're involved with.
So it seems like it's in some ways there's always a combination of what people can do individually, personally, but also needing to change things at a sort of systemic level.
Absolutely. This is a problem that exists at every level, and each of us can play a role in making a change personally by making different kinds of food choices, but it's also important to be involved in the political process. Here we're in a democracy, which is a participatory form of government, and if we show up, we can make a difference. If we don't show up, those who do are the ones that are able to call the shots, and it's important for us to be engaged.
A couple of years ago, I remember hearing in Kalamazoo, Carol Adams speak about sort of making the link between how we objectify women's bodies and how we objectify animals' bodies. I mean, for you, what's the importance of kind of that, making the connection between those kind of issues that people see as part of a larger sort of, justice issue?
Yeah, the way we treat others, whether they're animals or other people, is something that we have to look at. And historically, there's been prejudice, there's been discrimination, and there still is prejudice and discrimination. And there is at least some recognition that some of those forms of prejudice and discrimination are wrong, although unfortunately they still exist. So we just need to confront these things, look at them openly and honestly, and try to do better. And when it comes to animals, even within that whole area, certain animals are lower on the list than other animals. So there's prejudice and discrimination. And there are ways that the sort of exploiters tend to maintain the system of exploitation. And one is to demean the victims. And this has happened, with different people over the years. It also happens routinely with farm animals. For instance, being called a pig or a turkey is a put down. It's a put down for the person, but it's also demeaning to the animals. And so I think we just need to look at these things for what they are and ask ourselves, what is appropriate, and question certain assumptions. And if something has always been a certain way, should it be that way still? We don't necessarily, that's not a good reason for something to continue. It's always been that way is one of those things that is said to dismiss concerns. And we should then ask, why has it been that way, and should it be that way? And what is the best way forward? We don't need to be sort of handcuffed by our history. We can learn from it, and we can always do better.
Well, as somebody who's been kind of involved in this issue or this movement for more than 2 decades, what gains do you think kind of the animal rights, vegan movement, sort of compassionate living movement, what kind of gains have been made in the last 20 years, and what challenges do you think this movement is sort of faced with for the future?
I think some of the gains we've made include a broader understanding of the problems about factory farming, ranging from animal cruelty to human health consequences to environmental consequences. I think we've made some inroads legislatively. We've started to challenge some of the laws that have been on the books that have excluded farms from basic animal cruelty laws, that have excluded farms from labor laws and from environmental laws. We have a long way to go there, but we're starting at least now to challenge some of the existing laws. But we still have a system that is empowered by people sort of following old habits mindlessly. And that is our biggest challenge, is that people tend to be creatures of habit, people tend to do what those around them do. Most people are eating and living a certain way now and see others doing it and assume it's the appropriate way to live and eat. So challenging assumptions is really our key goal. And once people do that, I feel most people are humane. Most people don't want to promote and support cruelty. Most people want to be healthy and on a healthy planet. So I really feel that our raising awareness and showing people that they can make a difference and they can be empowered is our big objective right now. And I think we're making some progress, but it's about sort of stepping out of comfort zones and stepping out of old habits that I think are some of our bigger obstacles.
Well, maybe just by way of closing, if people were to visit the farm sanctuary, what might they see, and do you have any examples or stories of how people have been changed by visiting this place that you've been a part of creating?
Oh, absolutely. Well, Farm Sanctuary is a sanctuary for the animals, but it's also a sanctuary for people. It's a place where vegan is normal. It's a place where the animals get to live out their lives and be who they are. And so we've had people who have come and have just broken down, when they've gotten to meet the animals and have heard their stories. We have animals who come in afraid of people because all they've known is cruelty, but then they learn to trust, and the animals are transformed. And as the animals are transformed, so too are we in some sense. And the animals start showing compassion back when they receive it. And we had this one turkey, for example, who we called Lydia, the hugging turkey, because when people would go out to the barn and sit down on the grass, she would come up to them and crane her neck around the people's necks, sort of hugging them. So these are animals that, like any other animal or people, if they're treated with kindness, tend to respond in the same way. And so Farm Sanctuary is a place of transformation, it's a place of peace, and it's a place we encourage people to come visit.
Great. Well, we certainly encourage people to go to your website and get involved in that. Gene Baur, co-founder of the Farm Sanctuary, author of a new book called Farm Sanctuary, Changing Hearts and Minds About Animals and Food. Thanks for speaking with us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Okay.